And again, it's all about how these things affect the health of people.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to stop you, but apparently we're still facing some technical issues.
Okay.
Oh my God. Apologies.
I'm sorry to stop you.
I have recorded the beginning.
Now they could hear us. Perfect.
Okay. I can start over.
Perfect. So
we've got people saying we could hear you. So now, before we start, let's just ask everyone in the chat. Can you hear us when we're talking? Okay, let's see.
Now they can hear us. Okay, let's try it again.
Very nice.
Hear us now.
Excellent. There we go.
Okay, tell me if you see me wave.
Yes, I do.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, perfect. All right, it's good now. Perfect. All right, then let's try it again.
Okay, so I will say that all again. So thank you so much, first of all, for choosing Pure Earth. I'm Jen Marraccino. I do the fundraising for Pure Earth. And Pure Earth is a global nonprofit based in New York. We address toxic pollution issues that affect the health of people all around the world. All of the work that we do is in poor and middle-income countries, not in the developed world, simply because the pollution issues are not as severe in developed countries. And when I say pollution, I mean things like lead pollution in the soil, air pollution, issues with pesticides, issues with mercury. And it's all about how these pollutants affect the health of people, predominantly children. Children are affected more because their bodies are growing, their minds are developing. So when they're exposed to things like lead, for example, there's a much more serious health consequence. And Pure Earth, again, I could get into more detail, but essentially we put solutions into place that will prevent these toxic pollutants from continuing to harm people. And one of the main things, to tell you the truth, that we'd like to tell people is that, we've done a lot of research. We actually pretty recently published a report in this really well-known health journal called The Lancet. And it showed that pollution is responsible for over 9 million deaths every year, which is more than AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria combined. So it's huge, and it's just not really on the global agenda. Like, obviously climate change is super important, but that is on the global agenda. There's tons of funding directed at climate change, and pollution just isn't there yet. So we really also, we implement solutions, but we also do a lot of work to get pollution onto countries' agendas and, just to a place where it's really driving much more funding globally. Let me take a breath there.
Yeah, indeed. Like when I hear all about that, it's something I've been particularly thinking about ever since we chose Pure Earth, is about the awareness about pollution as a global health crisis. Because generally speaking, people, have got this idea about pollution as a very vague idea, but if you ask most people about, okay, precisely what does it mean in the concrete world, the danger that represents, I feel not a lot of people would probably be able to talk about it, really. So generally, what would you say, like, what do you think regarding the amount of awareness there is about that topic around the world?
I mean, we think the awareness is pretty low, and we feel like in the coming months or year, to tell you the truth, we think we're doing a lot of work to raise awareness. So for example, we had this report in The Lancet, which I briefly mentioned. And again, The Lancet is, to get a report in there, you have to have really done your research and proven that this is worthy of The Lancet. And when this article was published in The Lancet, which again, it highlighted the deaths and also the economic effect of pollution globally. Then we had gotten like over 2 billion eyeballs globally. We were covered on CNN, Fareed Zakaria did a piece, and we were on NPR, and we for a few months, it was out there, and then it kind of died down a little bit. Now we're actually working with UNICEF, and we've got another report that's coming out in the coming months that's going to specifically talk about the number of children affected by lead pollution. And it is a tremendously large number. And people are somewhat aware of things with lead pollution. Like here in the US, where we are, there was a situation in Flint, Michigan, when there was lead in the pipes, and it got into the water, and tons of school children and people within the Flint, Michigan community were affected. Their health was affected, and they had elevated blood lead levels. And that raised awareness. People were talking about it, but that was on this very limited level here in the US. So yeah, I mean, we think we're going to see a lot more with this UNICEF report that's coming out. Sometimes we also work specifically with certain industries. I don't know if I'm going a little bit all over the place here, but mercury pollution is a big issue, for example. And I don't know if everybody knows, but the leading cause of mercury pollution is artisanal gold mining. And this is because artisanal gold miners all over the world, millions of them, there are 30 million artisanal gold miners, people working hard to make a living and support their families. This is, there's gold. It's obviously found in the earth, and it's a way that people in a lot of poor countries can make a living is by mining for gold. But they use liquid mercury because liquid mercury binds to gold. It's like a magnet. So when miners break up rocks and sift through sand, they'll actually mix it with liquid mercury. It forms this amalgam, which is like a rock of liquid mercury and gold. They burn off the mercury because the mercury vaporizes to be left with a little chunk of gold. And in the meantime, the miners and their families breathe in the mercury fumes. The mercury settles in the soil and the oceans, and it bioaccumulates in our seafood. So, you may have heard, especially when someone's pregnant, they're told not to eat too much tuna fish. Tuna is a type of fish that builds up a lot of mercury. And again, the leading cause of this, it all goes back to gold mining. There are other sources of mercury pollution as well, but artisanal gold mining is this leading cause. So we do work closely with the jewelry industry. And that's one way that, going back to awareness raising, that it's starting to hopefully get out more into the public when it's an industry thing. And maybe you're going to buy a gold engagement ring, and people start asking, where does this gold come from? What are the miners like? And jewelers start talking about it. So we think there's going to be a lot of more awareness in the coming months and years on various pollution issues.
Okay. So now that we've talked about the awareness, what is it, what Pure Earth is actually doing? Like, can you tell us a little bit more about the process? How do you ensure to help this fight against pollution in these contaminated areas? And how do you make sure that the problem does not rise again in the future?
All right. So I will maybe, since I talked a little bit about this mercury issue, I'll use that as an example to talk a little bit about our projects in the field.
That's perfect.
Yeah, and I love this is a particular issue that I work very closely on, so I could talk about this forever. But so when it comes to artisanal gold mining, Pure Earth has been working for about 12 years on this issue. And what we do is, one, we will go out and first develop trust and do education with community members. So in this case, and in other pollution issues, a lot of times people just have no idea that they're being exposed to pollution, or maybe the livelihood that they've chosen has this toxic pollution component. So first we'll do community education. We may go into schools, do community meetings, work with local government officials, maybe local healthcare professionals, to educate people on these negative pollution aspects. Then we'll actually do the work to prevent the mercury pollution from happening. So we train gold miners in ways to mine for gold without mercury. There are different ways to do it. Essentially, there are various forms of gravitational separation. So you're using gravity instead of mercury to separate the gold from the rock and the sand. It's different ways of panning for gold, different ways of, it's called sluicing, when you're running your gold and rock down these long chutes with water. So there are various ways that you can mine for gold without using mercury. So we go in and we hire local country coordinators, and we build relationships with people who are connected to the community, and we will train miners in mercury-free mining. On mining as well, an interesting thing that we did recently is artisanal gold mining also causes a lot of deforestation and destruction to the rainforest, in particular in many Latin American countries and places like Indonesia and the Philippines. So we actually started doing some reforestation work where we're actually reforesting land that has been degraded by artisanal gold mining. So there are these very comprehensive programs when we're building trust with community members, educating them, finding out ways to actually stop the pollution, and also working closely with government, local government officials or national government officials to try to sort of train them in things that will work and will stop, and hopefully governments can then take on these projects and scale them up.
Okay. We got a question from the chat that is asking, do you think that we can individually act to prevent or limit the different types of pollution?
Yeah, we do. You know what, we tell people all the time that pollution is actually an issue that's solvable within our lifetime. It's the solutions exist. The challenge is getting the funding to implement the solutions. So,
that makes sense.
you know, yeah, I mean, we feel like within our lifetimes, we can sort of put ourselves out of business because they are all solvable issues, whether they are sort of these livelihood type solutions, or frequently we're cleaning up legacy pollution. So there are sites that have been polluted by an industry or a livelihood that has moved and is closed and complete. And then it's a lot of cleanup work that we do. So it can be done. Yeah, it's a solvable problem.
Do you think that we can do this individually? Like, do you think is this more of a task that is something like where we have to do this higher up, we have to tell the governments about it? Or do you think this is something where the average, like me or you, for example, can help?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, it's a little different on one hand than things like recycling, right? Or not using plastic bottles, which is important, but that's a little different than the type of pollution issues that Pure Earth works on. So a lot of it is getting the government buy-in. I mean, I think it's a little bit of a complicated situation, but this whole gold mining, this gold piece that I keep talking about, I do think there's going to be like a consumer component to it. And that's a little specific to this issue of mercury pollution, where we do believe that it's going to be driven by consumers going in and asking questions when they make purchases, because all, like in this instance, it really, gold mining is about people making a living, and if the people that are sort of refining and processing the gold are only able to sort of send out certified gold or mercury-free gold, and I'm kind of simplifying a little bit in the way that I am describing, but it will be driven by consumers. But sort of more to come on that. I mean, I think if this group kind of just keeps their ears open, you know, hopefully it'll be a little bit more clear as a consumer what you could ask. But still, you could go right now and ask the jeweler, or, you know, eventually, listen, gold's in everything, right? It's in our computers, our laptops, our phones. It's not just the jewelry industry. So I think there will be a consumer role.
You know, when I think about influence of the people themselves, I suppose I'm thinking, for instance, there's a tendency for many people to be averse to perhaps change. So I'm wondering, did you guys ever face situations where perhaps the changes that were required to solve those problems, like perhaps cause difficulties improving the situation?
Yeah, no, it's you're right on point. I mean, it is really difficult for people to want to change, especially when it's something like pollution where the negative health effects aren't so obvious, right? Like, for example, exposure to lead. Biggest health consequence is developmental issues, decreased IQs, things that are just not obvious, that being exposed to this lead or mercury or pesticides, it's not this clear cut health connection for people in the communities. They just, you don't really see it. You don't know that your child maybe would have a higher IQ or would develop differently if they weren't exposed to something. So it's not that obvious. And then, yeah, it is really hard to get people to change when they've been doing something for a long time. Like, here's another specific example I'll give you. A big cause of lead exposure in certain places, like Mexico in particular, is pottery. It's this artisanal pottery that is glazed with a lead-based glaze. And this lead-based glaze was introduced in Mexico over 200 years ago when the Spanish arrived in Mexico. And, it makes this beautiful sheen on the pottery. And many people in Mexico are eating off of this pottery. Salts is going into it, and coffee, acidic foods that in particular cause the lead to leach out. But people just were not aware of this issue. And the potters have been glazing their pottery with this glaze for a couple hundred years. And there is a solution. There is a lead-free glaze, but it also requires a little different temperature in the kilns that the potters bake their pottery in. So there's a learning curve, and at times the kilns need to be changed up and built differently. So it really is, it is hard to change behavior, especially with an issue that's just not so obviously clear cut to people involved in issues.
Yeah, it's especially the fact that it's not so obvious that indeed makes it difficult. I'm seeing in the chat right now some questions. There is the question: does Pure Earth also invest in technology research to solve pollution problems?
Let me think. So in technology to solve pollution problems, I feel like it could go in different directions. Like, we do use different forms of technology. For example, we're using drones to do some of the mapping, like when we're identifying sites. Again, on this whole gold mining piece, we've been using drones to map and find the areas that are deforested or more degraded by gold mining. And again, I keep going to the gold mining one just because that's such a big issue for me. That's just one of the areas that I work on a lot. I mean, I will say there's a new challenge out there right now called the ASM Global Challenge. And it is set up, it's like it's a $750,000 challenge that Pure Earth is a partner for. We didn't put it out. This group called Conservation X Labs is hosting this challenge. And I think it is sort of the new way to find maybe new technologies as solutions. So people, inventors, innovators can actually submit their ideas. It's a little complicated. You have to have something that's already been somewhat tested and has a little bit of a track record. But this particular challenge is meant to find like new technologies to solve problems. So that's something that we're we're involved with. Does that feel like it kind of answers the question?
Oh, it does. It does. Thank you so much. Flo, have you got a question from?
Yes, another question that I see right now is, do you think that there are any urgent changes that need to be done?
The most urgent changes. Let me think for a minute.
Of course.
The most urgent of them all. Let's see. Lead, pesticides. I don't know if this is totally going to answer the question, but I'll talk a little bit about another major pollution challenge, which probably is the most urgent because it's related to lead. And I think it's something that people might not know about. So there is a big urgency to this one. So the leading cause of lead pollution globally is the recycling of used lead acid batteries. So lead acid batteries are the batteries that are in cars and motorcycles, and they're all over the place. And lead is a very valuable commodity. So in many, many low-income countries, people are recycling these lead acid batteries in their backyards and communities to, again, make a living. It's similar to the gold mining scenario in terms of these are just people that don't have options to great livelihoods, and they're trying to support their families and survive. So they're really informally recycling these lead acid batteries, and the lead dust is getting into roads and communities and playgrounds. They're a place where kids are being exposed, and kids essentially touch the lead dust, put their hands in their mouth, and they're very exposed to lead. And we've got some good videos. We recently are doing work in Bangladesh, and somewhere on our website you could find a really great video that just, it's brief, but it shows this issue. So this is a really big one. I mean, it's urgent. There's not this urgent solution that we could all go out right now, you and I, and solve, because again, it's more about, like, Pure Earth is working with we call them ULAB, ULAB, use lead acid batteries, with ULAB recyclers, again, in India and Bangladesh. We're working with governments to kind of figure out solutions to maybe put recycling schemes into place, or to move the recycling into sort of industrial zones away from neighborhoods and places where kids and people are exposed. So that's one of the most urgent issues, to tell you the truth, is this recycling of used lead acid batteries that people just would never think about, right?
Yeah, it really seems so far the common thread in everything seems to be, generally speaking, because those poorly developed communities do not have the ways to financially support themselves, they have to rely on those dangerous methods. And that is why, I suppose in this case, organizations such as Pure Earth, and therefore providing, because really, it's a way also for us to understand indeed, and to everyone who's here also, why indeed we're supporting Pure Earth. And it is with this kind of money and donations that we can help support, making sure indeed that those poor communities then do not have to rely, and despite the time that it takes, that they change gradually their methods to more sustainable and non-polluting methods.
I think the next question in chat actually links to that. Do you think that raising awareness, like especially in these low developed countries, do you think that this is a major factor of reducing the pollution?
Yes and no. You know, again, it's hard with the individuals, because in so many ways you're trying to make a living. So even if you are aware, you know, it's sort of a balance. All right, well, I might be aware that what I'm doing is not great, but what are my alternatives? So I think that without having the solutions, just working on the awareness raising is tricky. right? Like I don't think we'd want to be an organization that focused on just the awareness raising if we didn't feel like we could also bring in the solutions, because on one hand, that's just a little depressing, right? You want to be able to say to someone, all right, we're raising awareness about this, but here we also have a solution.
Yeah,
so I think it's that balance.
Yeah, I feel like personally, this is something like, here we tell everyone do this and do this, but we don't really do something ourselves. So
it's also about
this is something like acting yourself, not only raising the awareness, but also acting yourself.
Yes, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, and governments have, like, for us, awareness raising with the right people on the global level is really important. So that's something that I will say, like, the founder of Pure Earth, Rich Fuller, Pure Earth was founded 1999, 20 years ago this year. And a lot of the work that he does is working with people on the more global level. He's met with President Macron in France. We work closely with, this is US based, but Gina McCarthy, she was a former head of the US EPA. And now she actually just moved to be head of NRDC, the National Resources Defense Council. And they're pretty big and they've been around for a really long time. So for us, awareness raising at that big global level is really important, because these global leaders need to they need to understand the issues, and they need to sort of work their development agendas around this issue. And again, have their budgets reflect being able to put solutions in place. Like, one of the things we do, to tell you the truth, we call them our HPAPs, we have a lot of acronyms, but our Health and Pollution Action Plans, HPAP. And we will get funding from big organizations like USAID, and to go in and work with a national government and identify their major pollution issues. We used to kind of go in a lot more and do the project work, which we still do, but we realize that starting off at this sort of top-down place where we can work with a government, put together this plan that identifies their major pollution issues as related to people's health, and then sort of work with them on finding the solutions. So we're doing these HPAPs in a lot of different countries: Colombia, Senegal, Indonesia. We think we're going to be doing it in Armenia, Mongolia, potentially. So that kind of awareness raising is really important for us.
Now,
seems to be about action, generally speaking. That seems to be the message in it. Everywhere around the world, taking a certain action, whether it be on our own level, but also on the side of leaders. And there's a certain level of action that they can take to help on those issues. So speaking, of actions, regarding, for instance, your projects, usually, obviously you've talked a lot about that one project with the mercury that you've been talking a lot about, but are there perhaps other examples of projects you could talk about briefly to give some more context and of the variety of what you guys do?
Yeah. You know what? Why don't I talk a little bit about like cleaning up legacy pollution? When I say legacy pollution, again, it's pollution that has been existing in a community for a number of years. So for example, one of the few projects that I actually got to visit myself, because when you're the fundraiser, you're not really always out in the field, but I got to go to Armenia. And it was a good example of kind of what we like to call Pure Earth's bread and butter. It was this beautiful historic church in Armenia that had been built on top of an old copper mine. And also, it turns out, it looks like potentially back in the day, the church was a fortress, and there actually may have been a lot of weaponry making going on there out of lead. But essentially, the soil that the church was built on top of. The property was extremely high lead levels. And the way that we know this, to tell you the truth, is we use an instrument called an XRF, which stands for something really long, X-ray. And since I'm not looking at it, I'm not even going to try to say what it is. X-ray something, or their fluorescent, sorry, XRF. We'll just call it an XRF. Kind of looks like a gun.
Fun enough.
Yeah, exactly. You bring it into the field and you kind of shoot it at the soil, and it gives you the readings. They show up right on this instrument. So you can really easily test the levels of lead in particular, as well as other toxins, arsenic, but a lot of times the main one we're looking for is lead. So the levels were off the charts at this church in Armenia. And in this case, we were really fortunate. We worked really closely with the Armenian community in the US to raise the funds needed to go in and clean up this churchyard. And cleaning up essentially meant that we covered up the contaminated soil. Lead in particular is very heavy. It doesn't move that much. Once it's in a place, it stays there. So in this case, we covered the contaminated lead with a geotextile, and the geotextile essentially is this barrier. So it's always a visual barrier that you know underneath the geotextile is contaminated soil. And then you put about 6 to 8 inches of clean soil on top of the geotextile. It's actually a somewhat simple project. On one hand, you cover all of the contaminated soil with clean soil. It costs money depending on the size and how much you're doing. But again, in this case, the churchyard was a place that community members picnicked on. Kids took field trips there. Families were there all the time. The churches are a really big deal in Armenia. So this was like a basic cleanup that we did. The church looks beautiful now. And it looked beautiful beforehand. You can't see the lead in the soil, but now you can go back and test it, and there's no lead. It's all clean soil. So there are a lot of projects that we do like that are sort of these kind of basic cleanup projects.
Yeah, indeed. And plus, I do believe we can actually see them all, or at least a good part of them, on the Pure Earth website. If I recall correctly, there's whole reports on each of them, if I'm not mistaken. And that's really good because it means there is transparency, and so anyone can really come and learn more about all of that. And I think that's what's important. We've been talking about, raise of awareness and the ability to then take action. And to do that, we need to understand what it actually is. And it is with that kind of behavior, indeed, that then things will evolve in that direction. Flo, have you got anything to add to that? Do you hear me? Wait, I'm not.
I can hear you.
Not hearing. Do you hear him? Because I see him. Wait.
Talking, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we can't hit. Wait. It's really, really strange. Yeah, now he's not talking, but he was talking before.
Yes, yeah, I saw that.
Okay. Oh, it's really unfortunate because the time is passing so much more quickly than I thought. So I'm almost thinking we'll need to do another interview one day because we'll almost be running out of time. So I think we've got time for a couple more questions. And I honestly think, yeah, indeed, I don't know, we'll have to try and keep in touch or something like that because that passed so quickly.
That was fun.
So let me actually ask you a question from the chat right now, and then we'll have to, because we'll be running out of time afterwards. We've got a question saying, how hard or long is it to clean up places? So such as in the cases you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, so a place like the churchyard in Armenia, I want to say that took maybe 2 months. And that was like a very specific area, right? And some of the challenges there were finding the clean soil. It's a somewhat remote part of Armenia, and we really pride ourselves, Pure Earth, on doing our projects in a very affordable, low cost manner. So there was a team, a local team working there. It was a local contractor, and maybe 4 or 5 guys. It wasn't this huge sort of construction project like you might see in a really developed country. So I would say that was maybe 6 to 8 weeks. Other than a lot of times, the tough part was leading up to the actual project, getting the government approvals and the approval from the church in this particular instance, and raising the money. But then there are some places, like you were saying, our website really does have a lot of great information, and a lot of it is on the blog. But there are places like Kabwe is a city in Zambia that's got a lot of legacy lead pollution. And we were able to go in and clean up one part of the neighborhood, and they were homes. What I talked about at the church, we did in backyards, in various people's homes, working really closely with community members. And we started in the most heavily contaminated part of the neighborhood, kind of worked our way out. And we were there for months, and funding ran out. And there's still so many homes that need to be cleaned up. It's not even just funding. It's a lot of times, sometimes government changeovers and, figuring out how to have the approvals to still work there. But yeah, so, I'd say a couple months just depend for a project, but then it just kind of depends on the scope of it and how big. Is it a sort of a specific area, or is it something that, needs sort of ongoing work? If that makes sense.
Okay, I see. Thank you so much. So Floa wants to ask you one last question, which is, do you have any personal favorite projects?
My personal favorite project. All right. Well, just more than one. I love the Armenian one. If there's anyone who's Armenian on this call, because Armenians are just wonderful. They're super connected to helping their homeland, and they're very, very philanthropic. So that was a great community that I really enjoyed working with. And then I love the work that we're doing in Peru right now. That's got this reforestation component. It's a really unique piece of it all. And I really enjoy all of the work. We call it ASGM, Artisanal Small Scale Gold Mining. If you're ASGM, that's the acronym for Artisanal Small Scale Gold Mining. And I really enjoy working with the jewelry industry. I've found a lot of awareness within small, sort of ethical, responsible jewelers who are trying to change their business practices and drive demand. And so I love all of the work that we're doing with them on mercury issues with artisanal gold miners. Those are my favorites. But I don't know. I don't think they're favorites, right? On something that's contaminating people. But, again, just being able to really, I enjoy being able to find people that really care about our work like you guys do, and, figure out ways to raise these funds and work with new people and keep the work going.
Well, yeah, little by little, I suppose any small amount that we can raise is always something that we really hope can really support an organization like yours. Right now, we've got even a comment saying, thank you for being here and keep doing what you do. Oh, now we can hear you.
Oh, now you can hear me again. This is great. Okay, then maybe I can say at least, yes, thank you so much for doing this interview with us.
Yeah.
It really means a lot to us. And yeah.
I want to say thank you guys so much. I am so impressed that you found Pure Earth and chose us. Like I said, I really try to understand everything. Well, this gaming, you said that was my 20-year-old son helping me before. They use Discord and all of this. So no, but thank you so much. I'm sorry we were a little tough to get in touch with that first. And like I said, I'm going to spread the word about the gaming community and how philanthropic you all are. And,
thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, it really means a lot. And as I was saying, even in the chat right now, I've got one message saying, thank you for being here and keep doing what you do because the world really needs you. So yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose that's the overall message of the chat. That's how they see Pure Earth. And
Yes.
so yeah.
And who wants to keep informed? Listen, if you did, I saw my inbox kind of filling up with lots of PayPal donations. So I imagine that's coming through this somehow. But listen, we will try to get email addresses if we have them into our e-communications list. And there is a place on our website, I think, where you can just ask to be added to our e-list. We try to keep everybody informed through newsletters and things like that.
Thank you.
All right. This sounds great.
Yes. Yes. Well, that was about it with the live interview with Jen Marraccino from Pure Earth. Once again, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time accepting to do this interview with us. Because there's this huge difference between, just doing something and giving money directly and having actually someone to talk to about what you do. So it really means a lot in terms of what we're doing here. So thank you once again.
Yes. Well, that was fun. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Have a great rest of the weekend. Good luck with the rest of the Bingothon.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I don't know how I officially leave.
Yeah, we'll leave that.
Later. Tomorrow.
Pokemon bingo.
Yeah.
I actually don't know much about it. I only know that a Red Potato will showcase the newest Pokemon. That is about all.